Welcome to Relative Our Family Mess. This is a dedicated space where we explore the deeper dimensions of life, focusing on true strength, timeless resilience, and the compelling stories that shape a man's journey. If you appreciate substantive, impactful content and refined perspectives, you are in the right place. Without further ado, I welcome you to today's new video. The phone rang at 11:52 at night. I know the exact time because I had just checked the dashboard clock 3 minutes earlier, the way I always do on long drives. 30 years as a financial auditor trained me to track time the way other men track miles. Every minute has a number. Every number tells a story. I was doing 78 on the I-10 40 miles outside of Phoenix, when the screen on my dashboard lit up with a name I hadn't expected to see at that hour. Sunrise Manor, the assisted living facility where my father, Arthur Caldwell, 94 years old, and still sharper than most men half his age, had lived for the past 2 years. I answered before the second ring finished. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. The kind of calm that people in medical facilities develop after years of delivering bad news at bad hours. Mr. Caldwell, this is Karen Webb, the night supervisor at Sunrise Manor. Your father collapsed approximately 40 minutes ago. He's been transported to Banner University Medical Center. The preliminary assessment indicates a cardiac event. You'll want to come as quickly as you can. I kept both hands on the wheel. I noted the time. I noted the details. Cardiac event. Banner University. 40 minutes ago, I told her I was on my way, and I ended the call. For exactly 4 seconds. I sat with the silence of the highway and the hum of the engine and the darkness of the Arizona desert stretching out on both sides of the road. Arthur Caldwell had survived a war, 4 decades on the bench as a superior court judge, the death of my mother, and 2 hip replacements. He was not a man who collapsed easily. That made it worse. Not better. Then I called my sister. Vivian picked up on the second ring, which told me she was awake. It was nearly midnight on a Tuesday. Vivian Caldwell Moore, 54 years old. CEO of a commercial real estate firm in Scottsdale. Did not stay up past 10 on weeknights unless something required her attention. I filed that detail away the way I file everything. Quietly. Without judgment. For later. Richard. Her voice was smooth. Almost. Too smooth. The kind of smooth that comes not from calm, but from preparation. Vivian, I said. Dad collapsed. They've taken him to Banner University. I'm 40 minutes out. There was a pause. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. But I have spent 30 years listening to the pauses between numbers on financial statements. And I know the difference between a pause that comes from surprise and a pause that comes from recalibration. I know, she said. I already got the call. I'm actually on my way there right now. Don't rush, Richard. The roads get bad near the Chandler interchange this time of night. I'll be with him by the time you arrive. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief exactly. Something closer to permission. Permission to ease off the accelerator slightly, to let my shoulders drop a 1/4 inch. To believe that my father was not lying alone in an emergency room at midnight while his family was scattered across the desert. She said she was already on her way. I believed her. That was the first mistake. I have a particular memory from my early years at Deloitte. I was 29 years old, working my first major corporate audit, and my senior partner pulled me aside before we entered the client's building. He said something I never forgot. "Richard, everyone we are about to meet today will seem reasonable. They will offer us coffee. They will smile at our jokes. And at least one of them is lying to us right now. Our job is not to decide who. Our job is to let the numbers decide." I thought about that on the drive into Phoenix. I thought about Vivian's voice, the smoothness of it, the precision of the pause before she spoke, the way she had answered on the second ring at 11:52 on a Tuesday night, as though she had been waiting for a call, not sleeping through one. I told myself I was being unfair. She was my sister. Arthur was her father, too. People process crisis differently. Some people go quiet. Some people go practical. Vivian had always been practical. I pressed the accelerator back up to 78. The desert on either side of the I-10 was completely dark, except for the occasional light of a distant ranch or a cell tower blinking red against the sky. Phoenix glowed on the horizon, like something burning slowly. I watched it grow larger through the windshield, and I counted the exit signs the way I count line items on a balance sheet. Methodically, one at a time, keeping my mind occupied so it would not drift somewhere I was not ready to go. My father was 94 years old. He had survived everything the last century had thrown at him. But cardiac events did not negotiate. They did not respect records or reputations, or the particular kind of stubbornness that had kept Arthur Caldwell on the bench long past the age when most men had retired to their gardens. I took the exit toward Banner University at 12:17 in the morning. The hospital sat back from the road behind a wide parking lot, its windows lit against the dark sky. I pulled into the emergency lot and sat for a moment with the engine running. Vivian had said she would be there. I turned off the engine and stepped out into the Arizona night. Even in July, the desert after midnight carries a particular kind of silence. Not peaceful, watchful. I walked through the automatic doors into the fluorescent brightness of the emergency waiting area and scanned the room in the way that had become instinct after 30 years of walking into rooms where something was being hidden. Vivian was not there. The waiting area held 7 people. None of them Vivian. I did what I always do when I walk into an unfamiliar room. I counted. 2 elderly women sitting together near the window, one holding the other's hand. A young man in a construction jacket staring at the floor. A mother with a child, asleep across her lap. The child's shoes still on, as though they had left in a hurry. A man in his 50s, sitting alone with a paper cup of coffee he wasn't drinking. I walked to the reception desk. The woman behind the glass looked up with the practiced expression of someone who had seen every version of worry a human face could produce. I told her my name. I told her my father's name. Arthur Caldwell. Admitted within the last hour. Cardiac event from Sunrise Manor. She typed. Looked at her screen. Typed again. He's been moved to the ICU, 3rd floor. She looked up. Are you the primary contact on file? I told her I was. She slid a clipboard through the gap in the glass. We need emergency treatment authorization before the attending physician can proceed with certain interventions. If you could sign where indicated. I took the clipboard. Then I asked the question that had been sitting in the back of my throat since I walked through the door. Has anyone else been up to see him tonight? Family member. My sister. Vivian Caldwell Moore. She checked her screen. The pause was brief but complete. No visitors have been logged since admission. Mr. Caldwell, you're the first family member to arrive. I signed the forms. All 3 pages. My handwriting was steady. I noticed that about myself the way I notice anomalies in a financial statement. Steady hands. Quiet mind. The part of me that had spent 30 years inside other people's crises had engaged without being asked. I took the elevator to the 3rd floor. The ICU at Banner University at 12:30 in the morning had the particular silence of a place where machines do the breathing that people cannot manage on their own. The hallway smelled of antiseptic and recycled air. A monitor beeped somewhere behind a closed door. A nurse moved past me with the efficient quiet of someone who had learned to exist without disturbing the fragile balance of the floor. The charge nurse at the station introduced herself as Patricia Reeves, middle-aged, steady eyes, the kind of face that had delivered difficult news often enough to do it without flinching. She walked me through the preliminary assessment. Cardiac arrhythmia, not a full myocardial infarction. Stable for now. The attending physician wanted to run additional tests in the morning. My father was resting. I could see him briefly, but he needed quiet. I followed her down the hallway. Arthur Caldwell lay against white hospital pillows, with a thin oxygen cannula across his upper lip and an IV running into his left arm. The skin on that arm was paper thin. I could see every vein. The monitors beside him beeped their steady rhythm. His eyes were closed. He looked smaller than I remembered. The way people always look smaller in hospital beds, as though the room is too large and they are not quite filling their own edges anymore. I pulled the chair close and sat. I had been there perhaps 6 minutes when I heard the elevator at the end of the hall. Vivian walked in wearing a cream blouse and dark trousers, her hair set, her posture the particular uprightness of someone who had somewhere important to be. She saw me immediately, and her expression did something careful. Not surprise. Something more controlled than surprise. Richard, you made good time. I stood. She moved toward me and we did the thing that we had been doing for years. The brief embrace that looks like closeness and means something closer to acknowledgement. How is he? She asked, looking past me toward the bed. Stable. I've signed the treatment forms. Patricia said the doctor will assess in the morning. Vivian nodded. She reached into her bag for her phone, the gesture smooth and practiced. And as she drew it out, the screen lit briefly in the dim hallway light. Lit long enough for me to see the notification at the top of the display. It was an email. The sender field read, Gerald Hatch, attorney at law. The subject line was visible for perhaps 2 seconds before she turned the screen away. Amendment timeline. Arthur Caldwell Estate. Urgent. She tapped the screen dark and slipped the phone back into her bag without acknowledging what had just happened. Then she stepped past me toward the doorway of our father's room. I did not say anything. In 30 years of auditing, I learned that the moment you reveal what you know, you lose the advantage of knowing it. The person across the table adjusts. They recalibrate. They begin constructing the next layer of explanation before you have finished examining the first. I stood in that hallway and looked at my sister standing at the foot of our father's bed. And I did what I had been trained to do. I said nothing. I noted the timestamp in my mind. 12:41 in the morning. I noted the sender. I noted the subject line. And I began, quietly and without any outward sign, to open an audit. Vivian left at 1:47 in the morning. I know because I was watching the clock above the nurse's station when she came out of Arthur's room, told me she needed to get some rest, and walked back toward the elevator with the same measured stride she had arrived with. No hesitation at the door, no backward glance at the man in the bed. Just the quiet efficiency of someone completing a task and moving on to the next one. I watched the elevator doors close behind her, and I sat back down in the plastic chair outside Arthur's room, and I did not move for a long time. The ICU at 2 in the morning has a rhythm that is different from any other place I have ever sat. The monitors beep in overlapping patterns, each one slightly out of sync with the others, so that the sound never resolves into anything comfortable. Nurses move in and out of rooms with the practiced silence of people who have learned that noise costs something on this floor. The lights stay on but dim. That particular fluorescent half-light that is neither day nor night and belongs to no natural hour. I have sat in a great many uncomfortable chairs in my life. Audit rooms, deposition waiting areas, airport terminals at 3 in the morning. I have learned that discomfort is not the enemy of clear thinking. Sometimes it is the condition of it. I opened the notes application on my phone and I began to type. 11:52. Call from Sunrise Manor. Cardiac event. Arthur Caldwell transported to Banner University Medical Center. 11:54. Called Vivian Caldwell Moore. Answered second ring. Voice smooth. Controlled. Claimed to be on her way to the hospital. Said she already received the call. 12:17. Arrived Banner University. No visitors logged since admission. Vivian not present despite claim made at 11:54. 12:41. Vivian arrived ICU 3rd floor. Phone screen visible briefly. Email notification from Gerald Hatch, attorney at law. Subject line amendment timeline. Arthur Caldwell Estate. Urgent. 1:47. Vivian departed. No conversation with nursing staff. Did not speak to attending physician. Did not ask about morning assessment. I read it back twice. Then I added one more line. Gerald Hatch. Research in the morning. In 30 years of financial auditing, I had learned that the first document you produce in any investigation is the most important one. Not because it contains the most information, because it establishes the discipline of the investigation itself. The moment you begin writing things down in order, with timestamps and observed facts separated from interpretation, you change the nature of what you are doing. You stop reacting, and you start building. I was building something. I did not yet know how large it would need to be. At 2:15 in the morning, I stepped away from Arthur's room and walked to the end of the hallway, where a single window looked out over the hospital parking lot and the dark outline of the South Mountain Range beyond. Phoenix spreads itself across the desert floor in every direction from that vantage point, a grid of amber streetlights and the occasional pulse of a traffic signal cycling through its sequence for empty intersections. I called Frank Osborne. Frank had been my senior partner at Deloitte for 11 years before he left to start his own forensic accounting practice in Scottsdale. We had not spoken in 4 months, which for Frank and me was not unusual. Ours was the kind of friendship that doesn't require maintenance. It simply exists, reliably, the way a well-structured account exists, available when you need it. He answered on the 4th ring, his voice carrying the particular texture of a man pulled from deep sleep, but unwilling to admit it. Richard. What time is it? It was not a question. I told him anyway. 2:15. I need to talk through something. A pause. The sound of movement. Frank sitting up. Is it Arthur? He's stable. Cardiac arrhythmia. He's resting. But Frank. Something else is hanging, and I need to think out loud with someone who understands financial architecture. I heard him exhale. Go ahead. I told him about the phone call, the smoothness of Vivian's voice, the 2nd ring pickup at midnight, the claim of being on her way that turned out to be false, the email from Gerald Hatch with the subject line I had seen for 2 seconds on a lit screen in a dim hospital hallway. Frank was quiet for a moment after I finished. Amendment timeline. He said, estate? Urgent. And she's the CEO of a real estate firm. Yes, and Arthur owns property, 400 acres of desert land outside of Maricopa. It's been in the family since my grandfather. I've never paid much attention to it because Arthur never wanted to sell. Frank was quiet again. Then what do you need from me? I need to know if there's anything in the public financial record about Vivian, about her firm, about any transactions connected to Arthur's estate in the last 6 to 12 months. Anything that shouldn't be there. I can start pulling records in the morning, Frank said. Give me until 9. I looked out at the Phoenix grid of amber lights and the dark mountain beyond. The window glass was cool against my palm when I pressed it there. Thank you, I said. I went back to the plastic chair outside Arthur's room, and I sat until the sky outside the window began to change. Not sunrise exactly. The first suggestion of it. The desert lightening by degrees, from black to deep blue to the particular pale gray that comes before color returns to the world. Arthur was still breathing steadily behind his door. I had a plan. Patricia Reeves found me still in the hallway chair at 6:45 in the morning. She did not comment on the fact that I had been there all night. People who work ICU floors develop a particular sensitivity to the varieties of vigil that families keep. And Patricia Reeves had the eyes of someone who had seen every version of it. She simply told me that Arthur had rested well, that his rhythm had stabilized further overnight, and that Dr. Ellison would be making rounds at 8 and would want to speak with me. I thanked her. I asked her one question. Who is the head of security at Sunrise Manor? She looked at me with the careful neutrality of a professional who has learned not to ask follow-up questions when family members ask unexpected ones. She said she could find out. 20 minutes later, she handed me a name written on a piece of notepaper. Dale Hutchins. Day shift starts at 7. I was at Sunrise Manor by 7:25. The facility sat 3 miles from the hospital, a low, sand-colored building arranged around a central courtyard where a fountain ran in a slow, decorative circle. The desert morning was already warm, the sky that particular shade of pale blue that Arizona produces in summer, before the heat has fully committed to the day. I parked and walked directly to the front desk and asked for Dale Hutchins by name. He came out from a back office 2 minutes later. Mid-40s, compact build, the careful posture of a former law enforcement officer who had traded a badge for a quieter version of the same work. He shook my hand and looked at me with the assessing eyes of someone who spent his days watching monitors and making judgments about what he saw on them. I explained who I was. Legal guardian of Arthur Caldwell. Room 14. I told him I needed to review security footage from the previous evening. I told him the time range I needed. 6 in the evening to 10 at night. He nodded slowly. You're the authorized contact on file. He paused. Can I ask what you're looking for? I told him I wanted to verify the timeline of family visits. That was all. Nothing more specific than that. He considered this for a moment, then led me back through a door marked Staff Only into a room that smelled of coffee and the particular warm electronic smell of monitors running around the clock. One wall held a grid of 16 screens showing different areas of the facility in the blue-gray light of security cameras. He sat down at the central console, pulled up the archive system, and typed in the parameters I had given him. The footage appeared on the center screen. 6:03 in the evening. The hallway outside Arthur's room. Camera angle showing perhaps 30 feet in each direction. The image was clear. The timestamp running in the lower right corner in white numerals. Dale set it to run at double speed. At 6:41, a nursing aide walked past, pushing a medication cart. At 7:09, one of the evening nurses stopped outside Arthur's door, checked something on a clipboard, and moved on. At 7:22, Arthur's door opened from the inside and a different aide came out carrying a dinner tray. Then, at 7:43, Vivian walked into frame. She was wearing the same cream blouse and dark trousers I had seen her in at the hospital 4 hours later. Her hair was set. Her pace was deliberate, the walk of someone who knows where they are going and has decided in advance how they intend to arrive. She stopped outside Arthur's door, looked at the name card in the holder on the wall, and pushed the door open without knocking. Dale noted the timestamp in a small notebook he had produced from his shirt pocket. Entry, 1943. I watched the hallway on the monitor. The door to Arthur's room stayed closed. 1 minute passed. 2 minutes. A nurse walked past without stopping. 3 minutes. 4. At 7:49, the door opened and Vivian stepped back into the hallway. She did not stop at the nurse's station. She did not speak to anyone. She walked directly back the way she had come, her pace unchanged, and disappeared from the camera frame in the direction of the front entrance. Dale noted the timestamp. Exit, 1949. 6 minutes, approximately. 6 minutes. I kept my face neutral and my voice even. Can you note the exact duration? He reviewed the footage. Entry 1943-04. Exit 1949-18. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. I wrote that down on my phone. Then I looked at the monitor. The hallway was empty again. The door to Arthur's room closed, the timestamp continuing its steady count. She did not speak to any staff members during that visit, I asked. Dale shook his head, eyes on the screen. Nobody. Went straight in. Came straight out. I looked at the footage. 6 minutes and 14 seconds. No nurse consultation. No physician update. No paperwork. No conversation of any kind with any member of the facility staff. I was about to ask Dale to export the timestamp log when he leaned forward slightly, his eyes on the screen, and said something that changed the shape of everything I thought I was looking for. She came back. Mr. Caldwell. Later that evening. He looked at me. And that time, She wasn't alone. Dale scrolled the archive forward without being asked. He had the instincts of someone who had done this work long enough to understand when a family member needed to see something and when they needed to be prepared before they saw it. He did not offer commentary. He did not look at me while he worked the controls. He simply moved the footage forward to 9:14 in the evening and let his hand rest on the keyboard. "Here," he said. "Watch the left side of the frame. At 9:15 and 20 seconds. Vivian walked back into the camera's view. She was moving at the same deliberate pace as before, the same set of her shoulders, the same purposeful stride. But this time there was a man walking beside her. He was perhaps late 40s, well built, wearing a dark suit jacket over a light-colored dress shirt with no tie. His hair was dark and cut close. He carried a leather document folio under his left arm, the kind that closes with a magnetic clasp and holds papers flat. He walked with the particular ease of a man who was accustomed to institutional settings. Hospitals, courthouses, conference rooms where decisions were made about other people's lives. "Can you zoom in?" I asked. Dale enlarged the frame. The image softened slightly but remained readable. The man's face was visible in three-quarter profile as he turned toward Vivian for a brief exchange before they reached the door. "Do you know him?" Dale asked. I did not. Not yet. I told him to keep the footage running. Vivian pushed open Arthur's door and both of them went inside. The hallway was empty. The timestamp read 21:15:41. I watched the door. At 21:16 and roughly 30 seconds, something moved in the narrow window set into the upper portion of Arthur's door. A shadow, then a light, brief and bright. The unmistakable rectangular glow of a phone screen activated in a dim room. It lasted perhaps 8 seconds. Then it went dark. "What was that?" Dale asked, leaning closer to the monitor. I knew what it was. I had seen it before in a different context. During a corporate audit 12 years ago when a CFO had photographed internal documents on his phone in a conference room, believing the security camera in the corner was pointed elsewhere. The particular quality of phone screen light in a dark space is distinctive. Brief, directional, deliberate. She was photographing something in the room, I said. Dale wrote that down without comment. The door stayed closed for another 4 minutes. Then it opened, and the man in the dark jacket came out first, followed immediately by Vivian. The man's posture had changed. When he had gone in, his bearing had been confident, the forward lean of someone arriving to complete a task. Now his shoulders were set differently, not defeated, recalibrated. The posture of a man who had encountered resistance he had not fully anticipated and was already adjusting his approach. Vivian's face was unreadable in the camera angle. She pulled the door closed behind her and said something to the man that the camera, of course, could not capture. He nodded once. She nodded back. They walked toward the elevator together without stopping at the nurse's station, without speaking to any staff member, without leaving any institutional record of having been in the building at all. At 21:22, the elevator doors closed behind them. Dale noted the timestamps. Second entry, 21:15:41. Second exit, 21:22:09. Duration, 6 minutes and 28 seconds. I looked at the frozen frame on the monitor. The empty hallway, Arthur's closed door. The timestamp stopped at 21:22. 2 visits, I said. Both exactly 6 minutes. Both with no staff contact. Dale nodded slowly. He had the expression of a man who understood more than he was being asked to confirm. "I need a copy of the timestamp log for both visits," I said. "And I need to know if this facility has the visitor sign-in requirement." "We do." He pulled a different screen up on the adjacent monitor. Visitor log for July 12th. He scrolled. Your sister signed in at 7:41 in the evening. He looked at me. She did not sign in for the 9:15 visit. She bypassed the sign-in for the second visit. I said, correct. I stood up from the chair. Dale tore 2 pages from his notebook and handed them to me without being asked. The timestamps for both visits written out in clear, even handwriting. I folded them and put them in my jacket pocket. Outside the staff door, the corridor of Sunrise Manor was beginning its morning routine. Aides moving between rooms. The smell of breakfast from somewhere down the hall. The ordinary texture of a day beginning for people who did not know that anything extraordinary had happened the night before. I walked to the parking lot and sat in my car with the engine off and the July heat already building against the windows. I took out my phone. I found the number Douglas Merritt had given me 6 months ago, when Arthur had asked me to update his estate documents. A referral from a colleague. A name I had filed away and never used. I called it now. Douglas Merritt answered on the 3rd ring. His voice was measured and awake. The voice of a man who received calls of consequence and had learned not to begin them with small talk. Mr. Merritt, I said. My name is Richard Caldwell. I think someone is moving against my father's estate. I need to know what our options are. A brief pause. Then, tell me what you have. Arthur Caldwell was awake when I walked into his room at 10:04 in the morning. Not the shallow, medicated wakefulness of someone drifting in and out of consciousness, but genuinely awake. His eyes tracked me from the door to the chair beside his bed, with the same focused attention they had always carried. 40 years on the Superior Court bench leaves a particular quality in a man's gaze. It does not soften easily, does not accept surface presentations at face value. My father had spent 4 decades looking at people who were telling him partial truths and locating the parts they had left out. I pulled the chair close and sat down. You look like you haven't slept, he said. His voice was hoarse from the oxygen cannula, but clear, deliberate. The voice of a man choosing his words. I told him I had rested in the hallway. He accepted this without comment, which told me he understood what it meant. Arthur Caldwell had never required explanation for the things that did not need explaining. How are you feeling? I asked. He considered the question with the seriousness he gave to all questions. Better than last night. The arrhythmia has settled. Doctor, Ellison came by at 8. He wants to keep me another 2 days for monitoring. I nodded. That's reasonable. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, Did Vivian come last night? I kept my expression even. She came by briefly. Around 7:45. Arthur nodded slowly. She brought someone with her the second time. A man in a suit. He wanted me to sign something. I leaned forward slightly. What did he want you to sign? Arthur's eyes moved to the window, then back to me. A document. He called it an estate planning update. Said it was routine. Said you had already reviewed it and approved the language. I felt something shift in my chest. Something cold and precise. The way a number shifts the meaning of an entire column when you realize it has been entered incorrectly. I have not reviewed any document, I said carefully. I have not spoken to any attorney about your estate in the past 6 months. Whatever he told you about my involvement was not true. Arthur looked at me without surprise. I know, he said simply. That's why I didn't sign it. I sat with that for a moment. Outside the window, the Arizona morning had fully committed to its heat. The sky was white-blue and cloudless, the kind of sky that offers no shade and no ambiguity. Dad, I said, tell me about the land. He was quiet for a moment. Not the quiet of reluctance. The quiet of a man organizing his thoughts the way he had organized arguments before a courtroom for 4 decades. 412 acres, he said finally. East of Maricopa, toward the Sonoran. Your grandfather acquired it in 1951. Paid $900 for the whole parcel. Desert land. Nobody wanted it then. And now, Arthur's mouth moved in something that was almost a smile. Now someone wants it very much. He paused. About 4 months ago, Vivian came to me with a development offer, a company called Sunridge Capital. They wanted to purchase the land for a resort development. Mixed use. Golf course. Residential lots. The usual. She said the offer was $4.2 million. I kept my voice level. What did you tell her? I told her I needed time to consider it. He looked at his hands on the blanket. The skin there was very thin, the veins prominent beneath it. What I did not tell her was that I had already spoken to a different attorney about updating my estate documents. I wanted Noah to have that land when I am gone. It has been in this family for 3 generations. It should go to a 4th. Noah, my son, 17 years old. Quiet and careful in the way of young people who have been paying attention to the world longer than the world has given them credit for. She found out about the update, I asked. I believe so, Arthur said. The visits began shortly after. First just Vivian, then Vivian with the man in the suit. He paused. I am not a fool. Richard, I spent 40 years on the bench. I know what pressure looks like when it walks through a door carrying a leather folder. I looked at my father in that hospital bed, the oxygen cannula across his upper lip, the monitors recording the steady rhythm of a heart that had kept its own counsel for 94 years. And I felt something that I recognized from the deepest moments of my professional life. The moment when the audit stops being about numbers and starts being about people. When the column of figures resolves into a human decision that someone made, deliberately, with full knowledge of what it would cost someone else. I reached over and took his hand. He let me hold it for a moment. Then he lifted his other hand and tapped the face of the watch on his left wrist. The one I had given him last Christmas. A simple device. Large display for easy reading. Voice activated. I had chosen it because it sent health alerts to my phone if his heart rate moved outside a normal range. Richard, he said quietly. Check my watch. When you get a moment. Check what's on it. I looked at the watch. Then I looked at him. His expression had not changed, but his eyes had the particular quality I remembered from my childhood, sitting in the back of his courtroom on school holidays, watching him look at a witness from the bench. The look of a man who already knows the answer and is waiting to see if the person in front of him is going to tell the truth. I will, I said. Good, he said. And then he closed his eyes and rested. I did not check the watch that afternoon. Arthur needed rest more than he needed me pulling a smartwatch off his wrist. And the information, whatever it was, had waited this long. It could wait until evening. That was the discipline of the work. You gather in the order that causes the least disruption to the things that still need protecting. I spent the afternoon at the hospital. I spoke with Dr. Ellison at 2:30, a thorough man in his mid-50s who delivered medical information with the same economy of language I had always appreciated in good financial analysts. The arrhythmia was responding to medication. The cardiac muscle showed no significant damage from the episode. 2 more days of monitoring, and Arthur could return to Sunrise Manor with an adjusted medication protocol. The prognosis, given his age, was as good as it had any right to be. I ate something from the hospital cafeteria that I could not afterward remember, and I sat with Arthur through the late afternoon while he slept, and the Arizona light outside his window moved from white to amber to the deep copper of a desert evening. At 8:45, I drove to the Marriott downtown and checked in. The room was standard. King bed, work desk, 2 windows overlooking the city grid. I set my laptop on the desk, ordered coffee from room service, and called Frank Osborne at 9:03. He answered immediately this time. "I've been pulling records since this morning," he said, without preamble. "Tell me what you want to start with." Vivian's firm first. Caldwell Moore Commercial Properties. Any transactions connected to Arthur's accounts or to a property parcel outside Maricopa in the past 12 months. Frank was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of someone reading from a screen. Then she has financial power of attorney over 2 of Arthur's accounts. Established 8 months ago. Notarized in November of last year. 8 months ago. I wrote that down. When did Arthur's regular attorney last review those accounts? 14 months ago, based on the public filing record. Frank paused. Richard. The power of attorney documentation is properly filed. On paper, it looks clean. On paper, I said. On paper. But the transaction history inside those accounts for the past 6 months is something else. I opened a new document on my laptop and positioned my fingers over the keyboard. Walk me through it. Frank took me through it methodically, the way we had once taken clients through audit findings together, one line item at a time, building the picture incrementally so that each element was understood before the next was added. This was the discipline of the work, not the conclusion first, the evidence first. Always the evidence first. 14 transactions, Frank said. All categorized under estate management expenses. All executed under the power of attorney authorization. The amounts range from $8,200 to $41,500. Total across 6 months, $342,000. I typed as he spoke. $342,000. I said the number aloud to anchor it, all of it properly documented on the surface. Frank continued. Vendor names, invoice numbers, expense categories. Whoever structured this understood how to make disbursements look routine. What are the vendor names? He read them to me. I typed them as he spoke. Most were generic. Property management consultants, estate administrative services, legal coordination fees, the kind of language that meant nothing specific and could mean almost anything. Then Frank said, Transaction 11, dated March 4th, amount, $15,000. Vendor listed as Priestley Medical Consulting, LLC. I stopped typing. Spell the name. Priestly. Frank paused. I ran it. Owen Priestley. Licensed in Arizona. Board certified in forensic psychiatry. He has testified in 14 competency proceedings in Maricopa County in the past 3 years. I set down my coffee cup. Forensic psychiatry. I said. Specifically, Frank said. In proceedings where one party is seeking to have another party declared legally incompetent to manage their own affairs. The hotel room was very quiet. Outside the windows, Phoenix continued its nighttime grid of amber light, indifferent and steady. I looked at my laptop screen. 14 transactions. $342,000. One payment to a forensic psychiatrist who specialized in competency proceedings. In 30 years of auditing, I had learned to recognize the moment when a pattern stops being a coincidence and becomes a design. It is not a dramatic moment. There is no single number that announces itself. It is quieter than that. It is the moment when the spacing between the data points reveals an intention that the individual points, taken alone, would never suggest. This was that moment. She hired a psychiatrist, I said, not to assess him, to certify him. Frank's voice was careful. That's the inference the transaction suggests. A $15,000 payment to a forensic psychiatrist who works competency cases. made from your father's own estate management account. 6 months before a man in a suit shows up at his bedside, asking him to sign documents. I stared at the transaction on my screen. $15,000. March 4th. Priestley Medical Consulting, LLC. Frank. I said. How many of these 14 transactions can you connect directly to vendors that actually exist and provided actual services? A pause. Then, 3. Maybe 4. The rest are either shell entities or businesses with no verifiable operational history, so the majority of $342,000 went somewhere that cannot be accounted for by legitimate services rendered. That is what the numbers suggest. Yes, I looked at the window. The city outside. The ordinary nighttime world going about its business while inside a hospital 2 miles away. A 94-year-old man slept with an oxygen cannula across his face and a smartwatch on his wrist that he had told me to check. Frank, I said, can you have a full forensic summary ready by morning? Time-stamped? Sourced? Court ready. Already building it, he said. Richard, this is not sloppy work. Whoever structured these transactions understood financial systems. I know, I said. That's what worries me most. Pull up the Priestley transaction again, I said. March 4th. Frank pulled it up. Invoice description reads Forensic Assessment Consultation. Phase 1. Phase 1. I repeated, which implies a Phase 2. Keyboard sounds. Then, April 19th. $12,000. Same vendor. Phase 2. Total payments to Priestley. $27,000. I opened a second document and began building a 2-column timeline. Left column, financial events. Right column, corresponding intent. The kind of analytical map I had built for corporate audits for 3 decades. November last year. I said. Power of attorney established. Confirmed. Left column. Vivian gains control of estate accounts. Right column access secured before action begins. February 18th. Sunridge Capital offer presented to Arthur. Confirmed. Public filing date. Left column $4.2 million offer. Right column, Arthur declines to commit. Resistance anticipated. March 4th. Priestley Phase 1. Left column competency assessment commissioned. Right column legal mechanism built before it was needed. I stopped typing and looked at what I had written. The spacing between events was not random. This was not someone reacting to circumstances. This was someone who had anticipated resistance and built the response before the resistance had fully materialized. She commissioned the psychiatric evaluation 1 month after Arthur declined the offer. I said, not after he refused to sign last night. 1 month after the first sign of resistance. She was already building the legal framework to override him before he had even said no definitively. That's what the dates support, Frank said. There was something else I had not shared with him yet. I shared it now. Frank, I said. Vivian worked at a financial services firm before she started her real estate company. Morrison and Webb. Downtown Phoenix. 6 years. She left as a senior associate in 2003. Silence. Then what was her role? She started as a junior auditor. Frank did not respond immediately. When he did, his voice had changed. Not dramatically. Just the way a voice changes when something clicks into place. She didn't hire someone who understood financial architecture, he said. She is someone who understands it. Yes, she built this herself, using the same training you have. I walked to the window. Phoenix at midnight was amber and indifferent below. I looked at my reflections in the glass. 58 years old. The face of a man who had spent his career locating things other people had constructed to stay hidden. She knew where I would look, I said. And she built it clean enough that looking almost wouldn't matter. Almost, Frank said quietly. I went back to the desk. The 2-column timeline sat on my screen. Financial events on the left, intent on the right. The correspondence between them was not proof by itself, but it was the architecture of proof, the frame on which everything else would hang. Cross-reference every vendor in those 14 transactions against the Arizona Business Registry, I said. Anything that cannot be verified as a legitimate operating business with a physical address and a tax ID, flag it. Already running it. Frank paused. Richard. She learned this from the same place you did. I know. That makes her dangerous to underestimate. I looked at the timeline, at the dates and the careful spacing between them. Built by someone who understood that the most effective concealment does not hide the numbers. It makes the numbers look like they belong. I'm not going to underestimate her. I said, I'm going to audit her. I closed the laptop at 2:41 in the morning. The room was quiet. Outside, the city grid held its steady amber light against the desert dark. I set an alarm for 6:30 and lay down without undressing. Before I closed my eyes, I thought about Arthur's hand on my wrist that afternoon. The deliberate tap against the face of his watch. The particular quality of his expression when he said it. Not urgency. Certainty. The look of a man who had already done what needed doing and was waiting for someone else to catch up. Tomorrow I would check the watch. Douglas Merritt's office was on the 14th floor of a building on North Central Avenue that looked out over the long, straight corridor of the avenue itself. The palm trees, running its median, casting thin shadows in the afternoon heat. I arrived at 2:58. His assistant showed me in without making me wait, which told me Douglas had been expecting the meeting to matter before I had said a word about why I was there. He was a trim man in his early 60s, silver-haired, with the particular stillness of an attorney who had learned that the quality of his listening was more valuable than the speed of his responses. He shook my hand, gestured to the chair across from his desk, and sat down without preamble. You said on the phone that someone is moving against your father's estate, he said. Tell me what you have. I told him. I went through it in the order I had assembled it, the way I would present findings in a formal audit report. The power of attorney established 8 months ago. The 14 transactions totaling $342,000. The 2 payments to Owen Priestley, forensic psychiatrist, totaling $27,000. The security footage from Sunrise Manor. The man with the leather document folio who had presented Arthur with papers to sign and been refused. The email subject line I had read for 2 seconds on Vivian's phone screen in the ICU hallway. Douglas listened without interrupting. He made notes on a yellow legal pad in handwriting I could not read from across the desk. When I finished, he set down his pen and looked at me with the careful expression of a man who had just received information that confirmed something he needed to verify before he responded to. Mr. Caldwell, he said, I need to show you something. He turned to his computer, typed briefly, and rotated the monitor so I could see the screen. It showed a filing from the Maricopa County Superior Court. The header read, In the matter of Arthur James Caldwell. Petition for appointment of guardian and conservator. I looked at the filing date. 3 weeks ago. She filed 3 weeks ago, I said. Douglas nodded. The petition was filed by Vivian Caldwell Moore, citing concerns about your father's cognitive decline and his ability to manage his financial affairs independently. It references a psychiatric evaluation conducted by Dr. Owen Priestley as supporting documentation. The $27,000, I said. Purchased the evaluation that became the foundation of the legal petition. Yes. Douglas looked at me steadily. There's a hearing scheduled. Mr. Caldwell, if the court accepts Priestley's assessment and grants the guardianship petition, your father loses all legal authority over his own estate, his property, his accounts, his ability to execute or modify any legal document. All of it transfers to Vivian as appointed guardian, including the ability to sell the desert land, including the ability to sell the land. Yes. And to ratify or modify the existing will. Douglas paused. There would be nothing Arthur could do about it. Legally, once guardianship is granted, his expressed wishes carry no binding weight. I looked at the court filing on the screen. 3 weeks of preparation. Priestley's evaluation already filed as evidence. The petition language professionally drafted. Gerald Hatch's name appeared at the bottom as petitioning counsel. When is the hearing, I asked. Douglas held my gaze. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Maricopa County Superior Court. Judge Helen Baxter presiding. Tomorrow morning. I looked at the window. The afternoon light over Phoenix was the deep copper of late July, the kind of light that makes everything look simultaneously beautiful and merciless. Mr. Caldwell, Douglas continued, if we intend to contest this petition, we need to file a formal objection tonight. We need supporting documentation that directly contradicts Priestley's competency assessment. And we need to appear in that courtroom at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning prepared to present it. I thought about the 2-column timeline on my laptop, the forensic summary Frank was building, the timestamp logs Dale Hutchins had written out in his careful handwriting. We have documentation, I said. Financial records showing the payments to Priestley were made from the accounts under Vivian's control. Security footage showing unauthorized attempts to obtain Arthur's signature. A forensic accounting analysis demonstrating systematic misuse of estate funds. Douglas picked up his pen. That is a foundation. He began writing. It is not sufficient by itself to dismiss Priestley's clinical assessment. We will need Arthur's attending physician to provide a counter-evaluation. We will need to demonstrate to Judge Baxter that the petition is not motivated by genuine concern for Arthur's welfare, but by financial interest in his estate. Can we do that by 9 tomorrow morning, I asked. Douglas looked up from the legal pad. We have, he said, approximately 12 hours. He paused. I have worked cases on shorter timelines, but I want you to understand what we are walking into. Vivian has had 3 weeks to prepare. We have tonight. I stood up from the chair. Then we should start now, I said. I was back at Sunrise Manor by 4:15. Douglas had given me 1 hour while he began drafting the formal objection to the guardianship petition and coordinating with Dr. Ellison at Banner University for a counter-evaluation. 1 hour was what I had. I used 23 minutes of it driving across Phoenix in the late afternoon heat, with the windows down, because the air conditioning could not compete with the July sun at that angle. Arthur was awake when I walked in. He looked at me the way he had been looking at me since I was a child, bringing home report cards I had not fully prepared for. Not unkindly. With the particular attention of a man who was assessing whether the person in front of him had done what was necessary. You went to see an attorney, he said. It wasn't a question. Douglas Merritt, I said. I sat down in the chair beside his bed. Dad, there's a guardianship hearing tomorrow morning at 9. Vivian filed the petition 3 weeks ago. Judge Helen Baxter is presiding. Arthur was quiet for a moment. His hands rested on the blanket with the stillness of someone who had received difficult information before and knew how to hold it without being moved by it. "I know about the petition," he said. "Gerald Hatch mentioned it during his visit. He presented it as a formality, something to protect my interests given my age. And you understood what it actually was." Arthur looked at me with 40 years of the bench behind his eyes. "I have presided over 14 guardianship proceedings. Richard, I know exactly what it is." I leaned forward. "Dad, you told me to check your watch. I have 12 hours before that hearing. If there is something on it that I need to see, I need to see it now." He lifted his left arm from the blanket and held it toward me without a word. I unclasped the watch carefully. It was a simple device, chosen for the size of its display and the clarity of its interface, with a health monitoring app that sent alerts to my phone if his readings moved outside normal parameters. I had set it up for him on Christmas morning, sitting at his kitchen table in Scottsdale, while he watched me with the patient skepticism of a man who had managed 9 decades without wearable technology and was not entirely convinced he needed it now. I connected it to my phone via Bluetooth. The health data loaded first. Heart rate history, sleep patterns, step count, all of it ordinary. The recorded rhythms of a 94-year-old man living a careful life. Then I saw the second application. It was not one I had installed. It sat in a folder on the watch's interface labeled simply Notes, which was where I would not have thought to look, and where, I understood immediately, Arthur had intended it to be. I opened it. 47 audio files, each one time-stamped, each one between 3 and 11 minutes in duration. The earliest dated 4 months ago. The most recent dated 6 days before his collapse at Sunrise Manor. I looked up at Arthur. He was watching me with the expression I recognized from his courtroom. Not satisfaction, exactly. The particular calm of a man who had done what the situation required and was now waiting for the record to speak. "Every time she visited," he said quietly. I activated the recording before she came through the door. The watch sits on the bedside table when I sleep. I kept it on my wrist when she visited. 4 months of recordings. I started with the 3rd file, not the first. The first 2 were brief. The early visits, the careful conversations of someone still feeling out the terrain. The 3rd file was dated 11 weeks ago. I pressed play and held the phone so that the speaker faced upward between us. Vivian's voice filled the quiet room. She was speaking to someone else. Not Arthur. The quality of the audio suggested Arthur was nearby, but not the subject of the conversation. A second voice, male, responded. "Gerald Hatch, Vivian. He's going to keep stalling. You know that. He's been stalling since February. Hatch Priestley's Phase 2 assessment is complete. We can file whenever you're ready. Vivian, file it. I'm not waiting for him to update that will. Once Sunridge loses patience and pulls the offer, there's nothing left to work with. Hatch. And if he contests it." A pause. Then Vivian's voice, flat and certain. "He's 94 years old and he lives in assisted care. Who is going to believe him over a board-certified psychiatrist?" I stopped the playback. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the Arizona evening was beginning its slow movement from copper to rose. Arthur had not moved during the recording. He sat against his pillows with his hands folded on the blanket and his eyes on the middle distance. "There are 47 of those," he said. "I know," I said. He looked at me then. Direct. Steady. The look of a man who has already made his peace with what the evidence shows and is waiting to see what the person holding it will do with it. I pressed play on the next file. The 7th file was dated 8 weeks ago. I had moved through the 4th, fifth, and sixth recordings quickly, each one adding a layer to the picture that was assembling itself in the quiet of Arthur's room. The fourth was a conversation between Vivian and Hatch about the timeline of the priestly evaluation. The fifth was Vivian alone on a phone call, her voice carrying the clipped efficiency of someone managing a project with multiple moving parts. The sixth was brief. Hatch confirming that Phase 2 of the assessment was complete and that the documentation would hold up to judicial scrutiny. The seventh file was different. It began with footsteps, the sound of someone entering Arthur's room. Then Vivian's voice, closer to the watch's microphone than in the earlier recordings. The particular proximity of someone who had sat down beside the bed. She spoke to Arthur directly in this one. Her tone was different from anything I had heard from her in the previous files. Warmer, the performance of warmth, the careful modulation of someone who has learned that certain conversations require a particular register. "Dad," she said, "I need you to think about the future, about what's practical." Arthur's voice, dry and even. "I think about the future every morning." "Vivian, at my age it concentrates the mind considerably." A pause. Then, "Vivian Noah is 17 years old. He doesn't understand land management. He doesn't understand development timelines or market valuations. Leaving 400 acres of desert to a teenager is not a gift. It's a burden." Arthur. "His grandfather left it to me when I was 32 and thought I knew everything. I managed." "Vivian, that was different." Arthur. "It was exactly the same." Silence. Then Vivian's voice shifting, the warmth thinning at the edges. "The will as it currently stands is not in the family's best interest. I've spoken to Gerald about updating the distribution. It would be cleaner, more practical. Noah would receive a financial settlement instead of an illiquid asset he doesn't know how to manage." "Arthur, how much of a settlement?" Another pause. Longer this time. "Then $200,000. I stopped the playback. $200,000. Against a $4.2 million offer from Sunridge Capital. The difference between those two numbers was not a rounding error. It was the architecture of the fraud itself. Pay Noah $200,000 from estate funds. Redirect the remaining $4 million to Vivian's control. And do it through a guardianship mechanism that Arthur could not legally contest once it was granted." I looked at Arthur. He was watching the window. "She offered Noah $200,000. I said, against $4 million. Arthur nodded once. "I told her the will would remain as written." I moved to the 12th file. This one was dated 5 weeks ago. The audio quality was slightly different, as though the watch had been positioned at a greater distance from the conversation. Vivian's voice was present, but overlaid with the ambient sound of the room's ventilation system. A third voice appeared in this recording. Male. Not Hatch. I turned up the volume on my phone. "Vivian, the timeline needs to move. The hearing is filed. Priestley's documentation is in order. But I need the approval to go through cleanly." Third voice. "That kind of approval doesn't come without consideration." "Vivian, I understand that." Third voice. $80,000. Before the hearing date. A pause that lasted 4 seconds. I counted them. Vivian, 80,000, confirmed. I stopped the playback and looked at my phone screen. The timestamp on the file. The duration. The clarity of the audio despite the distance. I looked up at Arthur. "Who was the third voice?" I asked. "Do you know?" Arthur's expression had not changed. He reached out and touched the edge of my phone with one finger. "Commissioner Dale Whitfield," he said. He oversees probate and guardianship approvals for Maricopa County. He has been in that position for 11 years. $80,000, I said. To approve the guardianship petition. Arthur folded his hands on the blanket. I believe that is what the recording suggests. Yes. I sat back in the chair. The room was very quiet. Outside the window, the Arizona sky had moved through, rose into the deep purple of early evening, the last light catching the peaks of the South Mountain Range on the horizon. I thought about what I was holding. 47 audio files. A 94-year-old former judge who had worn a smartwatch for 4 months, specifically to collect evidence against his own daughter, who had sat through visit after visit, listening to conversations about his diminishment and his disposal, and had said nothing, done nothing visible, simply recorded everything with the patience of a man who understood that evidence was the only language the law fully trusted. I reached over and took his hand. He let me hold it for a moment. Then he looked at me with the eyes that had presided over 4 decades of testimony and said, quietly and without drama, I was not going to let her take Noah's inheritance. And I was not going to let her do it without a record. I held his hand and did not say anything for a long time. Outside, the last light left the sky. The monitor beside his bed beeped its steady rhythm, and for the first time since I had answered the phone at 11:52 2 nights ago, I felt something shift in my chest that was not cold and was not calculated. It felt like the specific grief of loving someone you have underestimated for too long. I left Sunrise Manor at 6:48 and drove directly to Douglas Merritt's office. He was still there when I arrived, his jacket off, his sleeves rolled to the elbow, the yellow legal pad on his desk, covered in handwriting, and the kind of organized disorder that serious preparation produces. His assistant had gone home. The 14th floor was quiet except for the hum of the building's ventilation system and the distant sound of North Central Avenue traffic, 17 stories below. I connected my phone to his desktop speaker and played him the 3 recordings, the 7th file, the 12th file, and one I had not mentioned yet, the 9th, in which Gerald Hatch laid out the specific language they intended to use in the competency assessment to ensure it would satisfy Judge Baxter's evidentiary standard. Douglas listened to all 3 without interrupting. When the 12th file ended and Vivian's voice confirming the $80,000 payment to Commissioner Whitfield faded into silence, he sat back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. Then he said, "We need Frank Osborne on the phone right now." I called Frank. He answered on the 2nd ring, which meant he had not slept either. "I need you to authenticate 3 audio files for court submission," I said. "Timestamp verification, device provenance, chain of custody documentation. Tonight." "Frank, send them to my secure server. Give me 90 minutes. I sent the files. Douglas began drafting the formal evidentiary submission, while I sat at the small conference table against the wall and built the exhibit index. 47 recordings total. We would submit 12 as primary evidence. The 3 I had played for Douglas plus 9 others that established the pattern across 4 months. The remaining 35 would be held in reserve. At 9:47, Frank called back. "The recordings are authentic," he said. "Device metadata confirms they originated from the smartwatch registered to Arthur James Caldwell. Timestamps are unaltered. The audio has not been edited or compressed after the original capture. I can provide a full forensic certification signed and notarized by 10 tomorrow morning." Douglas wrote something on his legal pad and underlined it twice. "We need it by 8:30, I said. "Frank, 8:15. I'll have it couriered to the courthouse." After I ended the call, Douglas and I worked through the remaining preparation in the methodical silence of 2 people who understood that the quality of what they were building would determine everything that happened in the morning. The formal objection to the guardianship petition, the counter-declaration from Dr. Ellison, who had agreed after a 20-minute phone conversation to provide a written assessment of Arthur's cognitive function based on their interactions since admission. The financial exhibit prepared by Frank showing the payments to Priestley originating from accounts under Vivian's power of attorney. At 11:30, Douglas set down his pen. "The submission is as complete as we can make it tonight," he said. He looked at me across the desk. "Richard, in 30 years of estate law, I have seen guardianship petitions filed for legitimate reasons and for illegitimate ones. What you have assembled tonight is the most thoroughly documented case of the latter that I have encountered." I did not respond to that. I looked at the stack of materials on the conference table. The exhibit index. The audio authentication report Frank would send in the morning. The 2-column timeline that had started on a hotel room laptop and grown into a formal evidentiary structure. At 11:51, I stepped out of Douglas's office and into the hallway and called my son. Noah answered on the 4th ring, his voice carrying the particular texture of a 17-year-old pulled from sleep but trying not to sound like it. "Dad, what time is it?" "Almost midnight," I said. "I know. I'm sorry." A pause. "Is it Grandpa?" "He's stable. He's going to be okay." I paused. "Noah, I need to tell you something. There's a hearing tomorrow morning about your grandfather's estate, about the land he wants to leave you." Silence. Then, carefully, "What kind of hearing?" "The kind where someone is trying to take it away from him." "From you." I kept my voice level. "I'm going to make sure that doesn't happen. But I wanted you to know." Noah was quiet for a long moment. The particular quiet of a 17-year-old absorbing something too large for the hour. "Uncle Richard," he said finally, "is Grandpa going to be okay?" I thought about Arthur in that hospital bed. The watch on his wrist. 4 months of recordings made by a 94-year-old man who had understood exactly what was happening and had done the only thing available to him. He had documented it. Quietly. Patiently. With the discipline of someone who had spent 40 years trusting that the record, properly kept, would speak for itself. "He's going to be just fine," I said. "I promise." I ended the call and looked at my watch. 1:47 in the morning. 7 hours and 13 minutes until the hearing. I went back into Douglas's office, poured coffee from the pot his assistant had left, and sat back down at the conference table. There was still work to do. I walked into Maricopa County Superior Court at 8:47 in the morning. Frank's courier had arrived at 8:14, with the forensic certification sealed in a manila envelope that Douglas took from him in the lobby without breaking stride. We had been there since 8, going through the exhibit index one final time in the hallway outside courtroom 7, the way I had once gone through audit findings in a corridor outside a boardroom, checking that every number was where it needed to be before the door opened. The courtroom was smaller than I had expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lighting, 6 rows of gallery benches behind the bar. The kind of room where consequential decisions were made in surroundings deliberately designed to feel routine. I had testified as a financial expert witness 4 times in my career. I knew what these rooms did to the unprepared. They made the ordinary feel manageable right up until the moment it wasn't. Vivian was already seated at the petitioner's table when we entered. She was wearing a charcoal blazer over a white blouse, her hair set, her posture the particular uprightness I had been watching all my life. Gerald Hatch sat beside her in a dark suit, his leather document folio open on the table. Dr. Owen Priestley occupied the chair to Hatch's right, a compact man in his mid-50s, with the careful neutrality of someone who had testified in enough proceedings to have stopped thinking of the people in them as people. Vivian looked at me when I came through the door. Her expression did something careful and controlled. The same recalibration I had seen in the ICU hallway 3 nights ago when she had found me already there. She had not expected me to be here. She had not expected any of this to be contested. I sat down beside Douglas and set the exhibit folder on the table between us. Judge Helen Baxter entered at 9:02. She was a trim woman in her early 60s, with the economy of movement of someone who ran her courtroom on precision and did not appreciate the expenditure of time on anything that did not advance the record. She reviewed the case file briefly, looked at both tables, and invited the petitioner to proceed. Gerald Hatch rose. He was a competent attorney. I watched him the way I watched people who were presenting numbers I knew to be incorrect, with the specific attention of someone who understood the argument well enough to identify where it would fail. He laid out the petition cleanly. Arthur Caldwell, 94 years old. Resident of Sunrise Manor Assisted Living Facility. History of cardiac arrhythmia. Age-related cognitive changes documented by board-certified forensic psychiatrist. Petition filed by next of kin in the interest of protecting the estate from decisions that might not reflect the principal's best interests. He used the phrase best interests 4 times. I counted. Dr. Priestley testified next. He spoke with the practiced fluency of someone who had delivered this particular category of assessment many times. Mild to moderate cognitive decline, impaired executive function and complex financial decision-making. Recommendation for supervised guardianship as a protective measure. His language was precise and clinical, and built to sound like concern. Douglas rose when Hatch indicated he had no further questions. Your Honor, he said. The respondent objects to the petition on the grounds that the psychiatric assessment presented as supporting evidence was commissioned and funded by the petitioner herself, from accounts held under her own power of attorney over the subject's estate. He paused. Furthermore, the respondent has documentary and audio evidence suggesting the petition was filed not to protect the subject's interests, but to facilitate a specific financial transaction that the subject had repeatedly declined to authorize. Judge Baxter looked at Douglas over the top of her glasses. What kind of audio evidence? Douglas gestured toward me. I stood up. The courtroom was very quiet. 6 rows of gallery benches mostly empty. Hatch watching me with the controlled attention of a man recalculating. Priestley with his hands folded on the table. Vivian looking at the space slightly to the left of my face, which was where people looked when they were maintaining composure by not making direct eye contact. Your Honor, I said. My name is Richard Caldwell. I am Arthur Caldwell's son and the co-executor of his estate. Over the past 72 hours, I have assembled documentary, financial, and audio evidence that directly contradicts the basis of this petition. Judge Baxter, what form does this evidence take? I reached into the exhibit folder and placed the USB drive on the table. 47 audio recordings, I said. Made over a period of 4 months by Arthur Caldwell himself, using a personal device, in the course of conversations with the petitioner and her counsel. Each recording has been forensically authenticated by a certified digital forensics specialist. The authentication report is included in the exhibit package. I slid the package across to the clerk. The courtroom was completely silent. Judge Baxter looked at the USB drive. Then she looked at Vivian. Then at Hatch. Hatch was already on his feet. Your Honor, these recordings were obtained without the knowledge or consent of the parties involved and cannot be admitted as evidence under Arizona statute. Douglas, Arizona is a one-party consent state. Your Honor, the recordings were made by Arthur Caldwell, who was a participant in every conversation captured. They are fully admissible. Judge Baxter held up one hand. Both of you sit down. She looked at the USB drive for a moment. Then she looked at me. Mr. Caldwell, are you prepared to submit these recordings as formal evidence in this proceeding? I looked at the drive on the table. 47 files. 4 months of patience. A 94-year-old man in a hospital bed who had understood that the only weapon available to him was the truth. Carefully kept. Yes, Your Honor, I said. All 47 of them. Judge Baxter inserted the USB drive into the laptop on her bench herself. She did not ask her clerk to do it. She did not delegate the moment to anyone else in the room. That told me something about the kind of judge she was. The kind who understood that certain evidence required direct handling. That the chain of custody of a consequential document began with the person responsible for adjudicating it. She reviewed the file index for approximately 90 seconds. Then she looked up. I will hear 3 of these recordings, she said. Selected by the respondent. If the content warrants further review, we will proceed accordingly. Mr. Merritt, which files do you propose? Douglas stood. Files 3, 7, and 12. Your Honor. Judge Baxter nodded at the clerk, who connected the laptop to the courtroom's audio system. The speakers were mounted high on the walls to either side of the bench, positioned to fill the room evenly. At 9:41 in the morning, in a small wood-paneled courtroom in downtown Phoenix, Vivian Caldwell Moore's voice came out of those speakers and filled every corner of the space she had believed was entirely under her control. File 3 first. Vivian, he's going to keep stalling. You know that. He's been stalling since February. Hatch's voice. Priestley's Phase 2 assessment is complete. We can file whenever you're ready. Vivian, file it. I'm not waiting for him to update that will. Once Sunridge loses patience and pulls the offer, there's nothing left to work with. Hatch. And if he contests it. Vivian. He's 94 years old, and he lives in assisted care. Who is going to believe him over a board-certified psychiatrist? The clerk stopped the playback. The courtroom held its silence for a moment that felt longer than it was. I watched the gallery. 3 people in the back rows, courthouse regulars by their posture, had gone very still. Dr. Priestley had not moved, but the quality of his stillness had changed. It was no longer the professional neutrality of a prepared witness. It was something else. The particular immobility of a man realizing that the ground he was standing on was not where he had believed it to be. File 7. Vivian's voice again. Warmer this time. The performance of warmth I had recognized when I listened to it in Arthur's room. Vivian Noah would receive a financial settlement instead of an illiquid asset he doesn't know how to manage. Arthur's voice. Dry. And even. How much of a settlement? Vivian, $200,000. The clerk stopped it there, at Douglas's signal. $200,000, Judge Baxter said quietly. Against a $4.2 million offer? Douglas. The financial exhibit in the package documents the Sunridge Capital offer. Your Honor. Dated February 18th of this year. Judge Baxter made a note. File 12. Commissioner Whitfield's voice entered the courtroom. The third voice. Male. Unhurried. That kind of approval doesn't come without consideration. Vivian, I understand that. Whitfield, $80,000. Before the hearing date. 4 seconds of silence on the recording. I had counted them in Arthur's room. The courtroom counted them now. Vivian, $80,000. Confirmed. The clerk ended the playback. Gerald Hatch was on his feet before the audio finished. Your Honor, I must strenuously object to the characterization of these recordings. The context is unclear. The identities of the speakers have not been independently verified. My client categorically denies. Judge Baxter held up one hand. The gesture was small and absolute. Mr. Hatch, sit down. He sat. The judge looked at the laptop on her bench. then at Vivian, then at Dr. Priestley. Her expression had not changed since the first recording began. The careful judicial neutrality of someone who understood that her face was part of the record. Dr. Priestley, she said. In light of what this court has just heard, do you wish to reconsider any aspect of your testimony regarding the subject's cognitive status? Priestley looked at his hands on the table. A long moment passed. Then I would request the opportunity to review my assessment before making any further statements. Your Honor, that answer, I noted, was not a denial. Judge Baxter looked at both tables. This proceeding is recessed pending full judicial review of the audio evidence and the financial documentation submitted by the respondent. She looked directly at Gerald Hatch. The petitioner is advised that this court will be referring the matter of the recording involving a third party to the appropriate authorities for independent investigation. She paused. Neither party is to communicate with any witness or party to this proceeding without prior notification to this court. We are in recess. She stood. The room stood with her. I picked up the exhibit folder from the table and walked out of the courtroom into the hallway. Douglas came out behind me. Neither of us spoke immediately. The hallway was quiet. Institutional linoleum under fluorescent light. The ordinary architecture of a building where extraordinary things were decided every day. My phone vibrated in my jacket pocket. Unknown number. I opened the message. You have no idea what you just started. Back off while you still can. I read it twice. Then I showed it to Douglas without comment. He read it. Looked up at me. Then, with the steadiness of a man who had been practicing law for 30 years. Screenshot it. Send it to Frank. We just added witness tampering to the list. I took the screenshot. Outside the courthouse windows, Phoenix was doing what Phoenix does in July. Burning quietly under a white sky, indifferent to everything happening inside its buildings. I looked at the message on my screen one more time. Then I put my phone in my pocket and turned back toward Douglas. We have work to do, I said. Frank answered before I finished raising the phone to my ear. I've been watching the court filing system, he said. The recess just posted. What happened in there? I told him in the compressed, factual language we had always used with each other. 3 recordings played. Priestley requesting time to reconsider. Hatch objecting and being overruled. Judge Baxter referring the Whitfield matter to appropriate authorities. Then I read him the text message word for word. You have no idea what you just started. Back off while you still can. Frank was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Send me the screenshot. Number included. I sent it while we were still on the line. 30 seconds passed. The courthouse hallway was beginning to fill with people moving between proceedings. The ordinary mid-morning traffic of a building where a dozen different versions of justice were being administered simultaneously. Frank, the number is registered to a prepaid device purchased at a Scottsdale convenience store 11 days ago. 11 days ago, I said. Before the hearing was publicly scheduled. Correct. Which means whoever sent this knew the hearing date before it appeared in the public docket. That narrows the field considerably. Douglas had come to stand beside me while I was on the phone. I held the screen toward him so he could read Frank's conclusion as I relayed it. He nodded once and pulled out his own phone. Frank, I said. The 12th recording. Commissioner Whitfield's voice. Can you run an audio comparison against any public record of Whitfield speaking press conference? Public hearing? Anything on record? Already running it, Frank said. Give me 20 minutes. I ended the call and looked at Douglas. He was typing on his phone with the focused efficiency of someone who knew exactly who he was contacting and what he needed to say. I'm sending the threat message to the Arizona Attorney General's office, he said without looking up. Along with a summary of the Whitfield recording and the financial documentation. He paused. Richard, What happened in that courtroom this morning is no longer just a guardianship matter. The moment Whitfield's voice appeared on that recording, accepting a payment to influence a judicial proceeding, this became a criminal case. I understood that. I had understood it since Arthur's room the previous evening, when I had listened to 4 seconds of silence and a number. 80,000. Confirmed. What does that mean for the guardianship petition? I asked. Douglas looked up from his phone. It means Judge Baxter cannot rule on it until the criminal matter is resolved. The petition is effectively frozen. Vivian cannot take any action under it. She cannot access Arthur's accounts. She cannot make any decisions regarding his estate. Everything is suspended pending the investigation. So Arthur is protected. For now? Yes. Douglas put his phone in his pocket. The more important question is what Vivian does next. My phone vibrated. Frank, audio comparison is preliminary but strong, he said. Vocal pattern analysis against Whitfield's recorded testimony at the March County Commission. Hearing shows an 83% match. That's above the threshold for probable cause. I'm preparing a full report. Send it to Douglas and to the AG's office simultaneously. I said. Done. Frank paused. Richard. She's going to know within the hour that Whitfield has been identified. Whatever she does next, she's going to do it fast. I looked down the courthouse hallway. At the far end, near the elevators, I could see Gerald Hatch speaking on his phone with his back to the room. His posture had changed from the careful authority he had carried into the courtroom. He was standing differently now. The particular stance of a man managing a situation that had moved beyond the boundaries of what he had prepared for. Vivian was not visible. I went back to Douglas. Frank sending the vocal analysis to the AG and to you simultaneously. I said, what do we need to do right now, in the next hour, to make sure the system runs without us having to push it? Douglas considered this for a moment with the steadiness of a man who had been practicing law long enough to understand that the most important work sometimes happened after the dramatic moment had passed. 3 things, he said. First, I file a formal motion requesting that the court place Arthur's accounts under independent judicial oversight, pending resolution of the criminal matter. That removes Vivian's power of attorney authority completely and immediately. Second, I contact the Arizona Department of Financial Institutions regarding the 14 transactions. That triggers an automatic regulatory investigation that operates independently of the criminal case. Third, we notify Arthur's bank directly and request a protective hold on all disbursements. How long will all 3 take? I asked. Douglas looked at his watch. 2 hours. He met my eyes. After that, the system runs itself. The AG's office, the court's oversight mechanism, the regulatory investigation. None of it requires you to do anything further. I thought about what Frank had said. Whatever she does next, she's going to do it fast. Then we start now, I said. Douglas was already on the phone before I finished the sentence. I stood in that courthouse hallway and listened to him begin the first of the 3 calls. His voice carrying the measured authority of someone who understood that justice, properly constructed, did not require anger to function. It required documentation. It required proper channels. It required the patience to build something that would stand after the person who built it had stepped back and let it run. I looked at the text message on my phone one final time. You have no idea what you just started. I deleted it. The screenshot was already in 4 separate hands. The original was already unnecessary. Then I put my phone in my pocket and waited for Douglas to finish his call. 3 days passed. I spent them at Banner University. Mostly. Arthur's condition continued to improve at the pace doctor Ellison had projected. The arrhythmia responded well to the adjusted medication protocol. His appetite returned on the 2nd day. By the third morning, he was asking for the newspaper and complaining about the temperature of his coffee, which Patricia Reeves told me was an excellent clinical indicator. I did not tell him everything that was happening outside his room. I told him the petition had been challenged and that the court was reviewing the evidence. That was enough for now. Arthur Caldwell had spent 40 years on the bench. He understood that certain proceedings moved at their own pace, and that the most useful thing a person could do while waiting for an institution to complete its work was to rest and let it. So he rested, and I waited. Douglas called at 9:14 on the third morning. "Come to the office," he said. "I have updates on all three fronts." I drove to North Central Avenue through the early Phoenix heat. The city already committed to the day's temperature by 9 o'clock, the way it always was in July. The palm trees along the avenue median cast their thin, insufficient shadows. A city that had learned to exist in conditions that discouraged lingering. Douglas was standing at his window when I came in, looking out over the avenue with his hands in his pockets. He turned when I entered and gestured toward the chairs across from his desk. His expression carried the particular quality of a man about to deliver a comprehensive report, and who had organized it in his mind before I arrived. I sat down. He sat across from me and opened the folder on his desk. "Guardianship petition," he said. "Judge Baxter issued her ruling yesterday afternoon. Petition dismissed with prejudice. Her written order cites the audio evidence demonstrating that the petition was filed for purposes of financial gain rather than the subject's welfare, and that the supporting psychiatric evaluation was commissioned under a conflict of interest that renders it inadmissible." "Dismissed with prejudice," I said, "meaning it cannot be refiled, correct?" He turned a page. "Doctor, Owen Priestley submitted a formal withdrawal of his competency assessment to the court at 8:15 yesterday morning. His attorney released a statement indicating that Dr. Priestley had concerns about the integrity of the process through which the assessment was commissioned." He paused. He retained his own counsel 48 hours after the hearing. That tells you everything you need to know about what he believes is coming. And Gerald Hatch filed a motion to withdraw as petitioner's counsel. The same afternoon, Priestley submitted his withdrawal. The motion was granted. As of yesterday evening, Vivian Caldwell Moore has no legal representation in this matter. I looked at the folder on Douglas's desk. 3 days ago, that folder had held the materials we were building against a deadline. Now it held the record of what those materials had produced. "The financial investigation," I said. Douglas turned another page. "The Arizona Department of Financial Institutions opened a formal examination of the 14 transactions on the morning after the hearing. Yesterday, they issued a preliminary finding that 11 of the 14 disbursements from Arthur's estate accounts cannot be attributed to legitimate services rendered." He looked up. "The accounts under Vivian's power of attorney have been frozen pending full examination. $342,000. Inaccessible. Her power of attorney status revoked by the court as part of Judge Baxter's ruling. She has no further legal authority over any of Arthur's financial accounts or assets." He closed the folder, and the Attorney General's office confirmed this morning that they have opened a criminal investigation into the matter of Commissioner Whitfield. The $80,000 payment is their primary focus. Frank's vocal analysis report is part of their evidentiary file. I sat with all of that for a moment. The morning light came through the 14th floor windows at an angle that made the room feel cleaner than it was. The particular clarity of Phoenix light in the early hours, before the heat turned it white. Douglas reached into the folder one more time and placed a single document on the desk between us. He slid it across without speaking. I picked it up. It was a one-page summary order from the Maricopa County Superior Court. The heading read, "In the matter of Arthur James Caldwell." At the bottom, above Judge Baxter's signature, a single paragraph. The subject is hereby confirmed as legally competent to manage his own affairs. All estate accounts are restored to the subject's sole authority. The power of attorney granted to Vivian Caldwell Moore is hereby revoked in its entirety. Effective immediately. I read it twice. Then I set it down on the desk. "Everything is back in his hands," Douglas said quietly. I looked at the document, at Arthur's name at the top of the page, at the judge's signature at the bottom. The distance between those two things, one man's name and one judge's signature, was the distance that 30 years of auditing had taught me to measure, not in dollars, in the integrity of the record between them. "He's protected," I said. Douglas nodded. "Completely." I folded the document carefully and put it in my jacket pocket. Then I stood up, shook Douglas Merritt's hand, and walked out into the Phoenix morning to drive back to my father. Noah was waiting in the hospital lobby when I arrived. He was sitting in one of the chairs near the entrance with his hands folded in his lap, wearing a dark blue shirt that I recognized as the one he kept for occasions that required more than his usual careful casualness. He was 17 years old, and he had driven himself from Scottsdale that morning after I called him the previous evening and told him it was time. He stood when he saw me. He had his mother's height and my father's eyes, that particular quality of attention that skipped a generation and landed with the precision of something that had been waiting to find the right person to inhabit. "How is he?" Noah asked. "Better every day," I said. "He's been asking for you." Noah nodded once, the way young people nod when they are absorbing something larger than the words carrying it. We took the elevator to the 3rd floor without speaking. The hospital had the particular morning quiet of a place where the night shift had handed off to the day shift, and everything was running on the steady rhythm of established routine. Arthur was sitting up when we came through the door, not lying back against the pillows the way he had been for the past 5 days, but sitting properly, with the careful uprightness of a man who had decided that this was not an occasion for the posture of illness. He had asked Patricia Reeves to help him with his hair that morning. She had told me in the hallway before we went in, and he had spent 10 minutes making sure his collar was straight. Patricia had said it with the particular warmth of a nurse who had seen every variety of human dignity and still found it worth remarking on. Noah stopped just inside the door. Arthur looked at him for a long moment, the kind of look that does not need to announce itself, that simply lands and stays. "Come here," Arthur said. Noah crossed the room and sat in the chair beside the bed, the same chair I had occupied for 5 nights. Arthur reached out and took his hand in both of his, the papery grip of a man whose strength had moved inward over the decades. away from the physical and into something harder to measure. They stayed like that for a moment without speaking. I stood at the door and did not move. "You look like your grandmother," Arthur said finally. "Around the eyes." "Noah, I've seen pictures. You both had the same." Arthur nodded slowly. "She would have liked you very much." He paused. "I am sorry I did not make more occasions for us to be in the same room. That is a failure of mine, and I own it completely." Noah looked at their joined hands. "You're here now," he said. "That's what matters." Douglas arrived at 10:30 with the 2 witnesses he had arranged. Dr. Ellison and Patricia Reeves, both of whom had agreed without hesitation when asked. Douglas had the new will prepared and reviewed and ready for execution. He had done this efficiently and without drama, which was exactly what the moment required. Arthur reviewed the document with the deliberate attention of a man who had spent 40 years reading legal language and knew precisely what he was looking for. He asked Douglas 2 questions about the specific language of the land bequest. Douglas answered both. Arthur nodded, satisfied, in the way of someone who had found the document to be what it had been represented as. He signed on 3 pages. His handwriting was still clear, deliberate. The signature of a man who understood that what he was putting his name to would outlast the hand that wrote it. Douglas witnessed it. Dr. Ellison witnessed it. Patricia Reeves witnessed it. The document was complete. Arthur looked at Noah across the signed pages. 412 acres, he said. East of Maricopa, toward the Sonoran Desert. Your great-grandfather acquired it in 1951. He paid $900 for the whole parcel because nobody wanted desert land in 1951. Noah was listening with the complete attention of someone who understood that they were being given something that could not be returned once it was received. "This land has been in our family for 3 generations, Arthur continued. Your grandfather built his life around what it represented. Not the money, the permanence of it, the idea that there was something that would remain." He paused. "Now it belongs to you. What you do with it is your decision to make. But I wanted you to understand what it meant before it came to you." Noah looked at the signed document on the bed between them. Then he looked at Arthur. He did not say anything for a long moment. "Then I'll take care of it. I promise." Arthur's hand tightened briefly on Noah's. "I know you will," he said. "That's why it's yours." I was still standing at the door. I had not moved since we came in. I watched my father and my son in that hospital room in the July morning light, and I thought about what it had taken to arrive at this particular moment. The phone call at 11:52 at night, the drive across the desert, the plastic chair outside the ICU, the security footage and the paper trail and the 47 recordings and the courthouse hallway and all of the careful, patient work of the days between. I had done all of it to protect the thing I was looking at right now. A 94-year-old man and a 17-year-old boy. 3 generations of a family's history in the space between their joined hands. That was enough. That was exactly enough. Noah left at 2 in the afternoon. He hugged Arthur carefully before he went. The particular carefulness of a tall young person embracing someone fragile. And Arthur held on for a moment longer than Noah expected. which made Noah go very still in the way of someone receiving something they had not known they needed. They said they would talk soon. Arthur told him to drive carefully. Noah said he would. These were ordinary words, and they carried everything. I walked Noah to the elevator and stood with him while it came. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." I looked at my son, 17 years old. Arthur's eyes in a younger face. The particular seriousness of a person who had grown up faster than the circumstances required and had done it without complaint. "Your grandfather did most of it himself," I said. "I just finished what he started." Noah shook his head slightly. "That's not how he tells it." The elevator came. He stepped in and the doors closed, and I stood in the hallway for a moment in the particular quiet that follows when someone you love has just left a room. I went back to sit with Arthur. He was tired after the morning. The signing of the will, the conversation with Noah, the sustained attention of it all had cost him something that rest would replenish, but that rest alone could address. He dozed in the early afternoon light while I sat in the chair beside him and did what I had been learning, slowly, over the past week, to do nothing. Simply being present in a room without auditing it. My phone rang at 3:47. Vivian. I looked at the screen for 2 full rings. Arthur was asleep. The monitor beside him beeped its steady rhythm. Outside the window, the Phoenix afternoon had reached the particular white intensity of July at its peak, the kind of light that flattens everything it touches. I stepped into the hallway and answered, "Richard." Her voice was different from any version of it I had heard in the past week. Not the smooth control of the hospital, not the clinical precision of the recordings. Something thinner. The voice of a person who had been managing a performance for a long time and had recently run out of the energy required to maintain it. "Vivian," I said. A pause. "I need to understand what happens next. Legally, with the investigation, with the accounts." I leaned against the hallway wall. The fluorescent light above me hummed its single note. A nurse passed at the far end of the corridor without looking in my direction. "The accounts are frozen pending the ADFI examination," I said. "The AG's office is conducting a criminal investigation into the Whitfield matter. Douglas can give you the specific procedural timeline if you retain new counsel." Another pause. Longer. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, the careful, measured breath of someone choosing words with the awareness that the words now mattered in a way they had not mattered before. "I didn't think it would go this far," she said. I considered that statement for a moment. Not what it meant as an explanation, but what it revealed as a position. She was not saying she hadn't done it. She was not saying she regretted it. She was saying she had miscalculated the distance between what she had built and the point at which it would collapse. That was not an apology. It was a recalibration. "Even now, Vivian," I said, "I'm not the person you need to be talking to about what happens next. That conversation belongs to your attorney and the court. I can't help you with it, and I'm not going to try. Richard." Her voice caught on something. "We're family." I thought about Arthur in the room behind me, the signed will on Douglas's desk, Noah in the elevator saying thank you with the particular economy of someone who meant it completely. The 47 recordings made by a 94-year-old man who had understood, before any of us, what was happening and had done the only thing available to him. We were family, I said, and you chose to treat that as a mechanism rather than a relationship. I'm not angry about it. Vivian, I'm just done pretending it's something it isn't. A long silence. The kind that tells you the person on the other end has run out of positions to take. You chose money over family, I said. The system will decide the rest. I hope you find a good attorney. I ended the call. The hallway was quiet. The fluorescent light continued its single note overhead. Somewhere behind a closed door, a monitor beeped. The ordinary machinery of the floor continued its work, indifferent and reliable, the way well-built systems always are. I looked at the phone screen. Dark now. Vivian's name gone from it. The call log would show 3 minutes and 41 seconds, which was longer than it had needed to be, and shorter than it might have been 10 years ago when I still believed that the right conversation could change the architecture of a person's character. I had stopped believing that somewhere between the security footage and the paper trail and the 47 recordings, character is not changed by conversations. It is revealed by them. Vivian's had been revealing itself, slowly and completely, for longer than I had been willing to see. I put the phone in my pocket and went back into Arthur's room. He was still asleep. The afternoon light through the window had shifted slightly, moving toward the copper of early evening. I sat in the chair and looked at my father's face in that light. He looked, for the first time since I had arrived at this hospital 9 days ago, entirely at rest. The Arizona sky had turned the color of copper and rust by the time I made it back to Arthur's room at Banner University Medical Center. It was just past 6 in the evening. The fluorescent overhead light had been dimmed to half strength by the nursing staff, and the last hard angle of sunlight was cutting through the blinds in thin, warm strips across the tile floor. I pulled the chair close to Arthur's bed and sat down without making a sound. He was awake, watching the window, not anxious, not restless, just watching, the way a man watches something he has earned the right to see. I did not say anything at first. Neither did he. That was the thing about Arthur James Caldwell, 94 years old, a former federal judge who had spent 3 decades listening to men construct arguments out of half-truths and fractured logic. And he still knew exactly when words were necessary and when they were not. We had always communicated that way, the two of us. Long stretches of quiet that carried more weight than most conversations I had ever had in any boardroom, any conference call, any audit debrief. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. "Noah has good hands," he said. I nodded. "He does. Strong hands. Like yours when you were his age." He paused, the thin line of a smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "Though you were already carrying a calculator by then." I laughed. It came out quieter than I expected. But it was real, and it felt like something releasing in my chest that had been locked there for the better part of a week. "Dad," I said, and then I stopped. There was nothing left to explain. He knew all of it. He had known more of it than I had, and for longer. He had worn that watch for 4 months, voice activating it every time Vivian walked through the door, recording conversations in a room where no one thought to check a medical device clipped to the wrist of a man they had already written off. He had done that quietly, deliberately, and entirely alone. Not because he needed someone to rescue him, because he had raised a son who would know what to do with the evidence once he had it. That was the plan. His plan. Not mine. I reached over and rested my hand on top of his. His skin was thin, the veins visible beneath it, the knuckle still strong. A judge's hand. A father's hand. I should have called sooner, I said. He shook his head, a small, firm motion. You came when it mattered. Outside the window, the Phoenix skyline was dissolving into the last light of the day. The mountains to the east had gone dark at their ridgeline, but their lower slopes were still burning in amber and deep red, the kind of color that only appears in the desert, where the sky has no trees to interrupt it, and the light falls all the way to the ground unbroken. I had grown up watching that sky. I had left it for Chicago, for quarterly reviews, for budget cycles and client presentations, and 14-hour days in climate-controlled offices. And somewhere in all of that, I had stopped looking out windows. Arthur was still looking. 412 acres, he said, mostly to himself. 412 acres, I agreed. Your grandfather bought it for $900. He paused. He said it was the most foolish thing he had ever done, and also the smartest. I did not respond. He was not speaking to me, exactly. He was speaking to the window, to the light, to whoever was still listening from the distance of memory. After a while, his breathing slowed and deepened. His eyes closed. The hand beneath mine went still, not in the way that frightens you, but in the way of a man who has finished a long piece of work and found the rest that he deserves. I stayed in the chair. I did not pull out my phone. I did not open a spreadsheet, run a calculation, or start a new note file. I had spent 30 years of my life measuring everything that could be measured, quantifying risk, building models designed to tell me what the numbers meant, and sitting there in the half-dark, listening to the sound of my father breathing. I understood that some things do not reduce to columns. The last strip of sunlight moved slowly up the wall and disappeared. I sat there in the quiet, and for the first time in a very long time, I did not feel the need to analyze anything at all. I drove back to Tucson the following morning. The sun was already climbing by the time I pulled onto the I-10 heading south, and the desert on either side of the highway was doing what the desert always does in July, absorbing the heat without complaint, holding its shape, enduring. I had made this drive dozens of times over the years. Work trips, holiday visits, the occasional long weekend when I needed space to think. I knew every exit, every overpass, every stretch where the Joshua trees thinned out and the rock formations took over. But that morning, the drive felt different. Everything looked the same. I was the one who had changed. I thought about the phone call. 11:52 at night. A voice I did not recognize telling me my father had been rushed to the hospital, and me already reaching for my keys before the call had ended. I thought about the plastic chair outside the ICU, the hum of monitors through the door, the particular quality of silence that only exists in hospitals, at 2 in the morning. I thought about Dale Hutchins and the security footage, about the timestamp frozen at 1943. About 6 minutes and 14 seconds that unraveled 14 months of carefully constructed deception. I thought about 47 audio files sitting on a smartwatch that my father had worn every day without complaint, recording everything, waiting. He had trusted me to know what to do. That trust was not something I had earned in the week I spent pulling records and preparing evidence. It was something built over decades, in quiet conversations and long silences, in the moments when he watched me work and I watched him think, neither of us needing to say out loud what we already understood about each other. That is the thing about trust. It does not announce itself. It accumulates, the way interest accumulates, slowly and without drama, until one day you discover it has grown into something substantial enough to hold weight. I had spent 30 years as a financial auditor. I had reviewed the books of corporations that operated across a dozen countries, traced money through shell accounts and holding companies and entities designed specifically to obscure the movement of funds. I was good at it. I was methodical. I understood that numbers do not lie on their own, people lie, and numbers are the record they leave behind. Every fraud I had ever investigated started the same way, with someone who believed they were smarter than the system, smarter than the process, smarter than the people around them. They always left a trail. They always underestimated the patience required to follow it. Vivian had made the same mistake. She had built a sophisticated structure, the power of attorney, the psychiatric evaluation, the shell transactions, the carefully worded petition, the political connection to Commissioner Whitfield. It was not careless work. Seen from a distance, it looked like a legitimate estate management arrangement. But she had made the error that every sophisticated fraudster eventually makes. She had optimized for appearance and neglected the details. She had not checked whether Arthur's smartwatch had a voice activation feature. She had not considered that a 94-year-old retired federal judge might understand, better than almost anyone, the value of a documented record. She had looked at our father and seen a liability to be managed. She had not looked carefully enough. That was her audit failure, I have been asked, in the days since, whether I am angry. It is a reasonable question. 14 months of planned deception by someone who shared our family name, who sat at the same Thanksgiving table, who gave a eulogy at our mother's funeral 11 years ago that made the entire church weep. There are moments, I will not pretend otherwise, when I feel the full weight of what that means. Not just the legal violations, not just the financial exposure, but the particular grief of discovering that someone you loved had already decided, quietly and without telling you, that you and your father and your son were simply obstacles standing between them and a transaction. But anger is not what I come back to. What I come back to is the image of Noah standing beside Arthur's bed, 17 years old, watching his grandfather sign a document that would one day give him 412 acres of desert land bought by his great-grandfather for $900. Noah did not fully understand, in that moment, what the land represented. He will. He has time to learn it. And I come back to Arthur, watching the Phoenix skyline turn copper and rust through the hospital window. Not afraid, not bitter, not diminished. 94 years old, and still the most clear-eyed person in any room he occupies. Telling me I had come when it mattered. That was enough. That has always been enough. If there is a lesson in any of this, it is not about fraud detection or legal strategy or the mechanics of a guardianship petition. Those are tools. The lesson underneath all of it is simpler and harder. At the same time, the people who matter to you require your actual attention. Not the assumption of attention. Not the intention of attention. The real thing. Paid in time, in presence, in the willingness to ask a question and wait for an honest answer. I almost missed it. I was 2 hours away and I almost waited until morning. Do not wait until morning. If something in this story resonated with you, if you recognized something in it, felt something shift, found yourself thinking of someone you have been meaning to call, I would ask you to do one thing. Share it. Not for the numbers, not for the algorithm, but because the person you send it to might need to hear it tonight. And leave a comment if you are willing. Tell me what stayed with you. I read every one. Arthur is home now, back at Sunrise Manor, sleeping in his own bed with the smartwatch on his wrist. He asked me to leave it there. I told him that was probably a good idea.